Hi everyone, and today we are going to read about two big and comparative companies in India, which is NSE and BSE. So I have made a report on NSE and BSE, so we are going to read in depth about both of the companies, and I would suggest to watch the whole video till the end, or else I'm going to add the timestamps in the description so that if anyone wants to see any specific part of the company, they can directly go to that section. So first, let's start with NSE. That currently NSE is one of the world's largest exchanges, and they began their operation in 1994, and they were the first exchange who implemented the electronic and the screen-based trading. Then they also have 88.1% market share in the option premium turnover. But after the entrance of the BSE with the Sensex and the Bankex, so their market share has actually been reduced. So it used to be around 95 or 97%, but after that, now they have came down to 88.1%. If we take a look at their shareholding pattern as of March 2024, so individuals is 16.2%, then corporate unlisted companies are 15.5%, then insurance companies are 19.4%. So LIC is one of the major holdings in the NSE. And then if we look at the foreign holdings, they consist around 36.5%. Then rest of the holders have a very small stake in the NSE. And now let's start with BSE. So it was established as the Native Share and the Stockbrokers Association in 1875, and then it was the first stock exchange in Asia. Then afterwards, it is the fastest stock exchange in the world with a speed of 6 microseconds. And BSE became the first listed stock exchange in India in 2017. And if we take a look at their shareholding pattern as of March 2025, so FIs are 16.78%, DIs are 12.33%, public is 48.78%, and then others consist of 22.11%. So when I was reading, I realized that Zerodha has also invested, but it's a very small amount of almost 1 or 1.2% something. Now let's take a look at the image I have attached on the right hand side. So one of the revenue segment in the stock exchanges is clearing and the settlement segment. So NSE is currently having 51.7% market share. Earlier it used to had around 12%, whereas BSE had higher market share, but from FY24 they have increased their market share compared to what BSE had. And now we will try to understand more what is in the clearing and settlement segment. So now let's get back to the document. Now if you take a look at the clearing corporation details, so there are some formalities NSE and BSE need to do with the SEBI. So first, the Indian equity markets largely function with two clearing corporations. The first is the Indian Clearing Corporation, which is wholly owned by the BSE, and there is NSE Clearing Ltd, which is a subsidiary of the NSE. Now SEBI has said that the NSE and BSE, they both can't have the whole stake in the subsidiaries of the clearing corporation. There are two options for NSE and BSE. So the first option is that they can do a partial dilution where they can retain a majority stake of 51% in their clearing corporation, and the remaining shares will be distributed among the shareholders. And also they would gradually reduce their stake to 15% by lowering the shares, and also they need to maintain the exchange control while diversifying their ownership. And the second option which the SEBI has given to NSE and BSE is that they need to do full dilution. Now the main reason of doing this diversification is because there is always a risk of the governance which is influenced by the commercial interest, and the second point is to avoid the conflict of interest, because as they need to maintain independence, because a single clearing corporation clears the majority of the trades. Now if we take a look at the image I have attached on the right hand side, so this is a very good data point about both the clearing corporations of the NSE and BSE. Now first let's take a look at the NSE Clearing Corporation. So their revenue has increased from 366 crores to 2018 crores, and their EBITDA margins has increased from 64.8 to 82.1%. And if you look at their PAT contribution to their revenue, so that was 11.7% in FY20, and now in FY24 it was 16.1%, and in the first half of the FY25 it has come up to 19.1%. And now if we take a look at the BSE Clearing Corporation, so their revenue has increased from 60 crores to 408 crores. Their EBITDA margins has increased from 48% to 84% in FY24. And if you look at the PAT contribution in their revenue, it was 39.4%, and now it has increased to 74.9%. So that is a very huge contribution compared to what NSE PAT is contributing to their revenue. So we can clearly see that BSE business is very much dependent on the clearing corporation. Now we will start with the next segment, which is the industry overview. And if we take a look at the first image I have attached over here, which is the data point about India's market cap to the GDP ratio. So it is currently very low compared to what is of Switzerland, USA, Taiwan and Japan. So we are currently very underpenetrated as of that part. It is also because that many people in India don't invest in the stock markets, but that trend is changing. And now if we take a look at the next image, so we can see that there has been a surge in the demat accounts post FY20. So it was around 4 crores in FY20 and now it has came up to 18 crores in FY25. So that is a very good jump in the demat account holdings. And now if we take a look at the third image, so currently the turnover velocity of India is very low at 45% in FY23, whereas if you look at China, it was 395%, and Korea and Japan had more than 100%. And now if we take a look at the fourth image, it clearly shows us that how much India invests in the non-financial assets, which is real estate, gold, and not the financial assets like stocks. So 31% is only in the financial assets and 69% is in the non-financial assets, and that trend has been continuing from FY 2015. But that trend needs to be changed if we as a country need to grow in the stock market and economy wise. And now let's take a look at some of the world's big exchanges and how are they doing. Now there are various exchanges like the IC, which is the Intercontinental Exchange, which is in USA, then Nasdaq, then London Stock Exchange, then DBG, which is in the Germany, then Hong Kong, Japan, then NSE, which is our exchange, then Singapore, BSE, TMX, which is from Canada, and ASX, which is from Australia. Now if you take a look at the 5-year CAGR, so NSE is leading with 33% CAGR, then second comes the London Stock Exchange, and the third comes the BSE. If we take a look at the 5-year EBITDA CAGR, so NSE again leads over here with a 34.1% of CAGR, then BSE has a 32.7% CAGR. And if we take a look at the 5-year PAT CAGR, so NSE is again leading with 37.5% CAGR and 21.4% in BSE. But if we take a look at the EBITDA and the PAT margin wise, so the Hong Kong is completely dominating over here with 73.8% of EBITDA margins and 57.4% of PAT margins, whereas NSE has 65.8% in the EBITDA and 56.3% in the PAT margins. But even if we compare NSE and BSE, NSE has much better EBITDA and PAT margins. And if we take a look at ROE, NSE is leading all the exchanges with 38.5% of ROE. So as of financial ratio wise, NSE is completely dominating BSE. If we take a look at the image I have attached on the right hand side, so except NSE, they have given a forecasted valuation for all the exchanges, and here we can see that its revenue CAGR is higher compared to all the exchanges with 42.3% CAGR from FY24 till FY27. For FY27, they are expecting that BSE's PB ratio will be around 17, which is way higher than all the exchanges. And now if we take a look at the ROE forecasted valuations, Singapore is completely leading in FY27 expectation wise with a ROE of 30.7%. And in EBITDA margin wise for FY27, BSE is completely leading with a 43% of expectations, which is way higher than all the other exchanges. So now let's get to the next segment. So in this segment, we are going to read about all the exchanges and what are the services they are providing. If we take a look at NSE and BSE, the services they are providing is very similar with each other, like equity, cash, derivatives, indices, ETF, mutual funds. If we take a look at MCX, it is a commodity derivatives. If we take a look at NCDEX, it is a commodity market. And the last one is the MSCI, which is the Metropolitan Stock Exchange in India, which consists of small and mid cap companies which have low volume trades, and they provide equity, cash, derivatives, debt and the currency derivatives. And now let's take a look at the revenue segments in the NSE and BSE. If we take a look at the cyclical revenue characteristics, there is exchange transaction charges, which is the major part of the NSE and BSE revenue segment. Then there is clearing charges and interest on clearing corporations, which is the interest earned by the funds kept with the clearing corporations. And if we take a look at the recurring revenue segments, it consists of data and feeds. And now let's read more in detail about the each revenue segment, the image I have attached on the right hand side. So if we take a look at NSE, 82% of their revenue consists of transaction charges. So that is a very high allocation in this segment, and it is a more riskier thing because whenever there is a slowdown in the markets, so NSE will get impacted because of this segment. Because if we take a look at the Nasdaq, only 20% comes from the transaction revenue segment, then 28% comes from the financial technology segment, 19% comes from the listing segment, and it is evenly divided along the all revenue segments. And also if we take a look at BSE, they have also diversified the revenue segments very nicely, that 46% of the revenue segment consists in the transaction charges, then 20% is in the listing part, 22% is in the clearing corporation part. Even if we take a look at some of the other big exchanges, so London Stock Exchange has 46% in the data and analytics part, which is a recurring revenue segment. Then they have 17% in the benchmark solutions. Then about the IC, 34% is in the data and analytics part. So after reading about the other world exchanges, we got to know that NSE needs to focus more on the other revenue segments, and they need to diversify a bit compared to what they have currently in the transaction revenue segment. And now there is also one more image I have attached on the right hand side. So this is a data point about the market share of the NSE and BSE in the each revenue segment. So market share in the transaction charges, NSE is completely dominating with 88.1%, which it used to had around 95%. If we take a look at the market share in the futures, NSE is completely dominating. If we take a look at the listing service part, BSE is leading over here with 59.2% market share. If we take a look at the clearing and settlement market share, NSE is slightly leading as we saw earlier. Then NSE has a higher market share in the investment income and also higher market share in the data services segment. Let's go to the next segment, which is the expense segment. So this is a very important data point where we need to understand that what are the major expenses in the NSE and BSE. So currently regulatory expenses is around 24.1% of the BSE total revenue in FY24. Then in FY24 for NSE, their regulatory expenses formed 19.5% of their revenue. Then in the third point, regulatory fees forms major expenses for the exchanges, and NSE operational expenses has expanded at a 39.3% CAGR over FY20 to FY24, while if you look at the BSE, it has been 18.6% CAGR. And also, if we take a look at the share of the employee expenses, that has been declining from the past few years. And now, let's try to understand that what are the type of regulatory charges. So the first regulatory charge is the investor service fund. So this is primarily used for the investor education and the investor awareness programs, and also the stock exchanges are required to set aside at least 20% of the listing fees they generate. Then the second charge is the investor protection fund. So investor protection fund is used to compensate investors when the clearing members don't have enough assets to meet the admitted claims of the investors. And the third charge segment is the core settlement guarantee fund. So the objective of the core SGF is to have a fund for each segment like cash, FNO and the corporate debt, and they need to guarantee the settlement of the trades executed. Let's take a look at the image I have attached on the right hand side. So here we can see that out of the total expenses of the NSE, 58.7% is generated from the regulatory charges. And if we take a look at the BSE, that number comes to 33.8%. And this also makes sense because the NSE revenue concentration is very high in the transaction charges segment, and whereas BSE's revenue segment is quite diversified. And now let's get to the next segment, which is the financial analysis of the NSE and BSE. So first, let's start with NSE. In FY22, they had revenue of 8,300 crores, and in FY27, Nuama is expecting that it is going to go up to 19,800 crores. Then EBITDA was around 6,600 crores in FY22, and they are expecting that it will go up to 15,600 crores. If you look at their margins, so margins are 79.5% in FY22, and they are expecting that it will be almost similar to what it is currently to 78.8% in FY27, and they are expecting that the PAT is going to be around 13,100 crores in FY27. And now let's take a look at BSE. So what the Nuama was expecting in FY26, they have already achieved in FY25 all the data points like revenue, EBITDA, then profit after taxes. They have already achieved in FY25. So after understanding this data point, we clearly got to know that how BSE is growing very fast. So now let's get to the next segment, which is the history of the changes in the expiry days. So BSE had launched their Sensex and Bankex on Friday in May 2023. And this was followed with NSE, where they shifted their Bank Nifty to Wednesday in September 2023, and then BSE shifted their Bankex expiry to Monday in October 2023. And after the new FNO regulations, so BSE shifted the Sensex expiry to Tuesday in Jan 2025, and then NSE expressed the interest in shifting their Nifty expiry to Monday. But then the regulators came in between and they came up with a final regulation of allowing only weekly expiries on Tuesday and Thursday. So after the new regulations, so BSE need to shift their expiry from Tuesday to Thursday, and NSE got the Tuesday. And after the implementation of the new FNO regulations, which was effective from the March 2025, this will lead to a loss of the market share in the BSE, which was around 22.6% in May 2025. And now let's read about what has the management said in the current Concall. They have said that they have given a revenue of 3,236 crores, which is a 103% growth year-on-year wise. Then transaction charges has increased 186% to 2,030 crores, which is derived from the derivatives volume surge. Then BSE index derivatives has achieved their highest ever average daily premium turnover. Also, they have expanded their co-location capacity from 300 racks to 500 racks, and they are also going to add more 200 racks. Then the Star Mutual Fund revenue grew 18% year-on-year to 230 crores. They have also done 81 new listings, which was 194% increase compared to their previous year. And the last point is the common contract note. So let's understand what it is. So currently each broker deals with their own contract note. So BSE has made this mandatory, where they need to use their contract note, so that way their revenue will again increase because of this reason. And because of this, they're expecting that it is going to drive institutional volume growth. And now let's get to the next point, where I've discussed about one of the important pointers of BSE. So S&P Dow Jones had a 15% stake in the Asia Index Private Limited company, and they sold their 50% stake to the BSE. And before this deal, the Asia Index Private Limited had also launched some products like the BSE Select IPO, then BSE Sensex 60, 65, 35, where 65 consists of the current BSE Sensex holdings and 35% will be of the upcoming BSE Sensex stocks. Then BSE Sensex 60, then BSE Power, which will consist of the power companies, then BSE Internet Economy, and the BSE Capital Markets and Insurance. Now, after reading all the good data points of the BSE and NSE, let's read about the risk which are in this segment and which is already happening. So NSE had a lot of litigation cases from few years. So the first case is the co-location case, where in 2015 the brokers were involved in gaining an unfair advantage by exploiting the excess in the NSE system, and because of this reason the brokers were able to do a faster speed trades than the other traders. The second case was about the dark fiber case, where the NSE dealings over 2009 to 2016, some broker received unfair connectivity advantages. So the third case was about the corporate governance case, where the Chitra Ramakrishnan, who was the former MD and the CEO of the NSE, so she was involved in misusing her position, and she was also giving false statement to the SEBI. So the fourth case on the NSE was the trading access point case, where the primary function of the TAP system is to ensure that the members do not exceed the order rate they have purchased. But in February 2020 till 2023, there were multiple cases noticed in 11 entities, where they saw failures such as tap deficiencies, delayed responses, and non-compliances by the NSE, and NSE settled this case by giving an amount of 643 crores in September 2024. So that's a very huge number. The fifth case they were involved was the NCL case, where they did a payment of 27 crores and they settled the case with the SEBI. And the other risk in this segment is the competition risk between the NSE and BSE, and the macroeconomic slowdown. If there is any slowdown, so people will trade less, and that will eventually affect their revenue. And now let's get to the last segment, which is the technical analysis. And if we take a look at the BSE chart, currently it's trading in a very good upward momentum. It is trading above all the moving averages of 50, 100 and 200 DMA, and after making an all-time high of 3000 rupees, now it is currently consolidating a bit and it is currently trading at 2700 rupees. So thank you for watching this video. I hope this detailed reading of NSE and BSE helped you, And if you want more content like this, you can subscribe my channel and I will post more videos like this of stock specific content. And also write down your opinions about NSE and BSE, that what do you think, which company will do good in the coming future. And till then, see you in the next video.